Have you ever stopped to think about how we got from, paper diaries to these supercomputers we carry in our pockets? It really wasn't some overnight revolution. Nope. There was this whole forgotten war for the device that would basically define our digital lives. So today, we're going to unearth the story of the personal digital assistant, the PDA, the brilliant, kind of bizarre, and ultimately doomed ancestor of the smartphone you're probably holding right now.
For decades, this was pretty much it. This was the peak of personal organization. Leather-bound filofax, stuffed with addresses, appointments, little scribbled notes. It was definitely a status symbol, but let's be honest, it was also a mess. Totally static, clunky, and you couldn't search a thing.
And now we have this, a device that connects us to literally the entire world, all from the palm of our hand. That jump from paper to this pocket-sized omniscience, it feels like it happened in a flash, like a revolution that just exploded overnight. Yeah, but that's not what happened. It wasn't a flash. There was this crucial, really messy, and honestly fascinating evolutionary step that got us here. A whole category of devices that fought for our pockets, they defined what the future would look like, and then they were almost completely wiped from history.
Okay, so let's get into it. We're going to start by looking at the very first attempts to digitize our diaries and our address books, and our story actually begins over in the UK. So the big idea, right? It was actually pretty simple, but it was totally revolutionary for the time. What if you could take that static, impossible-to-search paper organizer and replace it with something alive? A device that could find a contact in a split second, that would beep to remind you of a meeting, that could carry your whole life in your pocket.
And this is where a guy in the UK, a physicist named David Potter, saw this huge opportunity. He realized that even though the whole idea of personal information was, totally alien to most people back then, there was a massive future in building a device just to manage it, and for regular, ordinary people.
So after a few early wins, his company, Psion, released the Series 3 back in 1991. And man, was it a thing of beauty. It was this brilliant clamshell device about the size of a partially full can of soda, they said. But it wasn't just an organizer. With its tiny but totally usable keyboard, a word processor, even a spreadsheet, this thing was a real computer in your pocket. And it was a huge, huge hit.
But okay, while Psion is quietly crushing it in the UK with this keyboard-first approach, a completely different and way louder revolution was starting to brew over in Silicon Valley. Over there, the keyboard was seen as old news, a relic. The future, they were all convinced, was the pen. And the hype was just off the charts. I mean, we're talking about legendary investors like John Doerr, comparing it to the launch of Lotus 123. That was the original killer app that made everyone have to own an IBM PC. The entire industry was just certain that pen computing was the next giant leap forward. The vision they were selling, championed by companies like Go Corporation, was just intoxicating. Imagine it, writing on a screen just as naturally as you would on paper. You could circle a word to select it, or just draw an X over something to delete it. A completely intuitive, keyboard-free computer was right around the corner. Or so they thought.
The dream was powerful, but the reality, well, it was a little trickier. The main problem was a massive one. Could a computer actually understand the messy, totally inconsistent handwriting of millions of different people perfectly every single time?
And nothing shows this problem better than this. Apple's super-hyped Newton PDA became a pop culture punchline. It was so famously bad at recognizing handwriting that The Simpsons made fun of it for misreading Beat Up Martin as Eat Up Martha. The tech it wasn't there yet.
But, out of the wreckage of all these super expensive, high-profile failures, one team learned a really important lesson about what people actually wanted and what the technology could actually do.
And the key person here is a guy named Jeff Hawkins. His first shot at a PDA was, it was a complete disaster. It was called the Zoomer. It was designed by a committee, which is never a good sign, so it was slow, it was expensive, and it tried to do way too much. It failed big time, and his company, Palm, was about to go under.
So totally frustrated, Hawkins just goes back to the drawing board. And I mean that literally. He carved a block of wood to the exact size he wanted the new device to be, and he came up with 4 simple, non-negotiable rules for it. It had to be small enough for a pocket, it had to be fast, it had to be super simple to sync, and it had to be affordable. That's it. And this right here, this is the light bulb moment. They completely redefined what the device was for. Forget about replacing your PC, no. This new device would just be a companion, an accessory for your main computer. It didn't need to do everything, it just had to do a few core things, like contacts and calendars, perfectly. And guess what? That relentless focus on simplicity, it was a total game changer. The Palm Pilot was an absolute runaway success. They sold 1 million of them in just 18 months, which was a staggering number for a new gadget back then. It just completely took over the market almost overnight.
Of course, when you have that kind of insane success, you're going to get noticed. And it immediately caught the eye of the biggest giant in the industry, Microsoft.
So, Microsoft's game plan seemed pretty smart on the surface, right? They were going to use their absolute dominance on the desktop to their advantage. They created a handheld operating system, Windows CE, that looked and felt just like Windows 95, which everyone already knew how to use. What could possibly go wrong?
Well, here's what that actually looked like in reality. It meant literally cramming a complex desktop interface, and you can even see the tiny little start button right there, onto a screen the size of a credit card. It was cluttered, it was confusing, and it was just a nightmare to use.
And the results? Well, you can see them for yourself right here in this chart. Even with all of Microsoft's power and money, and all the predictions that they would just crush Palm, Palm's obsession with simplicity won. By the year 2000, Palm OS had a wild 73% of the market. Windows CE, just 11%. It wasn't even a contest.
But here's the thing. Even while this whole PDA war was raging on, something completely different was happening on the sidelines. A technology that was about to change everything and make this entire battle totally obsolete. The mobile phone.
All of a sudden, the idea of carrying two different gadgets, one for your calls and another for your calendar, started to feel kind of ridiculous. Pioneers like the Nokia Communicator and then, of course, the BlackBerry, which mastered mobile email, they started merging these two worlds together. The standalone PDA's days were numbered. The smartphone era was beginning.
And that really set the stage for the next great tech war, one that would be even bigger than the PDA wars. See, the PDA's true destiny wasn't to be a standalone device. It was to become a feature, the brains inside of a mobile phone. And the only question left was who was going to build that future? The computer companies who knew software, or the phone companies who knew hardware? The race to create the modern smartphone was officially on.